Oh, that was really nice. Thanks for that. Hello, world. What is up? Welcome to Build. Oh, man, I'm your host, Matt Forte. We're here live at the Build Studio in New York City. Tigertron is the only eco-conscious game developer that's made it their mission to create games inspired by real-world environmental issues. Now, make no mistake, these are not preachy educational software-style games that put message over substance. In fact, their inaugural release, Jupiter and Mars, is a super immersive underwater adventure game set in a shocking future world inspired by geological and ecological events that are happening right now. Is really cool. It's coming to PlayStation 4 and PSVR on Earth Day. The game looks amazing, and I'm super excited because joining me here in just a few short moments to talk all about it, the founders of Tigertron and the developers behind Jupiter and Mars, James Mielke and Sam Kennedy, are in the building. How about that, guys? You excited? I'm excited. Make a little bit of noise for them. Perfect. That's the exact amount of noise I had hoped for. We're going to bring them out in just a moment. But before we do, I believe we have a trailer for the game. Perfect. So let's go ahead and run that clip.
This is the story of Jupiter and Mars.
Oh, very cool. Ladies and gentlemen, make some noise. Join me in welcoming James Mielke and Sam Kennedy right here. Do it up. Guys, congratulations on the game. I'm super excited to talk to you all about it. We're so close to release. Earth Day right around the corner. I imagine you're very excited. How are you guys feeling right now? You feeling
very,
good?
Very good. Actually, it was really cool to see the trailer here in studio with the kind of booming bass and everything like that. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's exciting. I mean, we've been working on this for two years now, so to see it come out in the wild is going to be really cool.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. I'm excited to get into that whole thing, the whole process of making it, the whole story behind it. Dial back just for a second. Take me to the beginning, though. You guys, and correct me if I'm wrong, from everything I read, you guys are the founders of Tiger. You guys started Tigertron together. Like, it's your baby.
Yeah. We actually, we started a couple years ago. James and I actually both worked in the video game industry for about 20 years. We actually got our start writing about video games. I read you were journaling. We kind of had that crazy job of actually playing games for a living and reviewing games. And but what it really allowed us to do is learn about all the different games out there, what makes great games, what makes players love games. So we've always been very passionate about games. We then, after writing about them, we then went into creating them ourselves. And James went to Japan, worked at a bunch of different studios in Japan. But then, a couple years ago, he called me up and said, really, he started feeling like there's something more we have to do with this medium. And, I basically, totally agreed. Like, we need to do more. The Earth needs our help, basically.
Yeah, for me, the turning point was when I had kids, and I started to get worried about the kind of planet we were leaving behind. I mean, it sounds like a cliche at this point, but it's really sincere. I worry about like what kind of air conditions or water conditions that my children are going to have when I'm gone. So I wanted to try and do something about it while I still could.
Yeah.
So that was back around, was it 2015? Is that when you guys,
Yeah. And really for us, there was kind of an inflection point too with VR. VR, allows you to tell amazing stories in a way more immersive way. And so for us, kind of, we set out to create a game. It's playable in VR and non-VR, but really for us, the ability to transport people into a world and tell a story that way in VR was really powerful. So that was a big inspiration for the start of the company too.
For sure. I want to get into that real quick though. I just was talking to some people. Have you guys seen any of Netflix's Our Planet yet? Have you?
Yeah, I've binged that one.
Oh, yeah. I was just talking to some of the people from that show, and it's just interesting to me that coincidentally you're all here on the same day, but driven by that same passion and that same understanding of like our planet. We're not being responsible house guests here. Like we're not taking care of our home, and it's just interesting to see these amazing pieces of art kind of driven by that, and motivated by that.
Yeah, I mean, and I think too for us, as I mentioned, kind of with VR, Jupiter and Mars actually takes place kind of in a near future Earth where, all the sea levels have risen. And, what we felt was if we could actually, you always read the stories about, hey, 50 years from now, a lot of our cities could all be submerged. We felt like if we could actually bring players into that and let them experience it firsthand, how powerful could that be potentially?
For sure. There is a huge difference between reading that by this year, the water level will rise to this height, and then like to put on the headset and be in the world and then see the Statue of Liberty or see these global landmarks completely submerged. So before we even get to that point, was this is the inaugural game for Tigertron? Was this always the first idea? Was it rising sea levels? Did you guys explore other types of things that could or will happen down the road and look for opportunities with games within that? Or was it like, oh, stop digging, we struck gold, this is it, let's do the underwater one? How did it look like in the very beginning when you were coming up with Jupiter and Mars?
Well, I've actually been working on the design for Jupiter and Mars for probably about 8 years now. I came up with the idea in around 2011 after I watched the movie The Cove, which talks about an annual dolphin slaughter in Japan, which is where I was living at the time. And so I came up with this idea about this game with two dolphins in sunken underwater coastal cities and islands. And it sort of evolved. It really took off when I proposed it to Sony for their VR headset, and they loved it because they didn't have anything like that. They wanted to see something that would put players underwater in an immersive virtual reality world, and this was like the natural fit for that. So, 9 years later, the game has finally become a reality, which is pretty neat.
What did you think the first time you put the headset on and you were in the world that you'd been thinking about for X amount of years? That must have been a heck of a trip.
It was pretty amazing. I mean, like Sam and I are certified scuba divers, so we made sure we had that experience so that we could bring that into the game. But to be able to put that on without having to strap on 80 pounds of scuba gear is pretty cool. And what we do in the game, you'll never see in the real world anyway. So that in itself is pretty wild.
So we got the company, we got the idea, the game's happening. Do you start weaving the science and the story together simultaneously? How do you straddle that line between we don't want to be preachy, but we want to be inspiring and informative to some degree?
Yeah, that was a big thing for us. We don't want to hit people over the head. We don't want to tell you you're bad because you eat meat, you wear leather, you use plastic stuff. That's kind of part of what our daily lives are like right now. But there are places where we can pump the brakes. And so what we do with the game is we show people a world that could possibly happen. We design it in kind of a fantastic way, so it's obviously still a video game, but when you're playing the game, hopefully we cause some people to stop and think like, wow, could this really happen? Could the water levels actually rise above the top of the Statue of Liberty or Big Ben? And if people walk away and they decide to Wikipedia some stuff and find out what's causing this or how far could it go, then we've achieved what we set out to do.
Yeah, and there's actually some things in the game that are definitely rooted in science as well. For instance, we have in the game the dolphins are kind of trying to get through or take out technology that humans have left behind, and some of the technology that you encounter in the game are these kind of audio harassment devices, which is actually something that actually exists, and we thought that basically it tries to keep sea life away from humans try to keep sea life away from certain areas, things like that. We thought that was an interesting concept that we could actually play with in the game. So there's a lot of things like that.
Noise pollution is actually like a very big problem. It doesn't leave like it doesn't last forever like an oil spill or something like that. But it's actually one of the things that causes like whales to beach on land and stuff like that, because it disrupts their inner equilibrium. So we actually designed this as sort of like a non-bloody threat for the game, like these sort of noise emitters to keep sea creatures away from the human environments. But as we did more research, we found out that these are actually real and in use now.
That's pretty wild. Yeah. Were there certain elements? So it sounds like those elements kind of came as you were working on the project, as it was developing. There's a really cool thing that and it reads immediately. The first time I saw the video, I was like, that looks like echolocation. The way the graphic, the line sort of extends out over the scape and then comes back and brings like sort of a brief glimpse. Were there certain like cornerstones that you knew from day one, the echolocation, things like this, that were going to be a part of the game that you were really excited to see realized?
Yeah, echolocation was pretty much our bread and butter. We knew that if you're going to be in VR and you're going to be in this underwater world and you're going to be looking around, the most frequent moment-to-moment thing you're going to do is use echolocation. And because we need it to be a visual representation, it's purely an auditory thing for dolphins, but as gamers, you need to be able to see it. So we did that whole like wireframe web, the expanding web effect, so that, we made it look as cool as possible, so that, the thing that you have to do the most is the thing you want to do the most.
That's pretty cool. I'll go on.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say too. We actually spent quite a bit of time trying to get that echolocation effect really right. But another thing too for us, we're gamers. We love games. We want other gamers to enjoy this as a gaming experience and not just kind of as a educational experience or anything like that. There are a lot of games from the past, things like Metroid, Eco is another one that really inspired us along the way. And you'll as players, I think you'd see some kind of elements like that in the game.
It's designed so Jupiter and Mars. You're in the role of Jupiter. Mars is your companion, and it's AI driven. Was there ever any talk of opening it up to making them both player driven characters, so you can interact with other dolphin people, as it were?
Well, the hard part with especially when you're designing something that's also supposed to be compatible with VR is when you have two people who are possibly going in completely different directions, and you're trying to create a very strong narrative experience. You kind of have to make it a single-player experience. It's not that you can't do multiplayer, but for us, what we wanted to do was tell this story, and that meant having Mars on screen or close to it, close to you, so that you could call him pretty much at any time. And he's pretty much your action button. As a VR experience, we knew that it would be kind of a solitary gameplay experience. You can only put one headset on at a time. So because, some people get apprehensive about going deep in the water or whatever, we wanted to make sure that they always felt like they had company, like they had a friend, a companion. So that's where Mars comes in.
That's a pretty endearing and sweet little idea. We want to make sure people have friends. That's what we're doing. I want to bring up a couple of screenshots just from the game and take a look at it for a second, because the game really is freaking gorgeous. And all the little different elements and the tribal-esque designs on I believe that's Jupiter that we're looking at there.
That is Mars.
Or is that Mars?
Yeah.
Forgive me.
No, it's totally fine. Like Jupiter is you're in first person as Jupiter, because when you're yeah, in the sort of cinematic cutscenes in between the gameplay segments, you'll see both of the dolphins, but Mars is the one that you see on screen because he's sort of your action button. And the tribal markings sort of point to the futuristic element is that hard metals like chemicals, all kinds of plastics have been dumped in the oceans, and so these things have sort of infiltrated the sea life, and that's why even the elder whales have these big fluorescent markings. So this just sort of brings out their characteristics. You can see from Mars, he's got like tribal style markings, and he's a little bit more the aggressive one. Jupiter has like G clefs and musical sort of bars on her body. So she's the one who's like singing all the time with echolocation.
How much of this mythology did you have scribbled down in a book from 8 years
Lots.
ago, 10 years ago? Did you ever envision it in any other, like a companion medium, like an animated series or anything like that? When you have a world this rich and deep, you're either going to have like a bunch of really great games or a bunch of really crazy messed up like animated shows. Like, it's so cool to have such a rich and deep backstory to pull from.
Yeah, we've always hoped that like someday we could actually take Jupiter and Mars and turn it into like a animated series or something like that, because there's this IP for I think for a lot of obvious reasons resonates with a lot of types of people, men, women, children. Whenever we've demoed the game, we've always had big lines of women and kids lining up to play it because they see dolphins and they're like, oh, I'm there. So I think this would really lend itself to something like that, but that's maybe the next step.
Just for the heck of it, can I get another screen up there just because this game looks so gorgeous? This one we kind of cropped in a little bit just because it was so beautiful. All the different colors, and you see a little bit of the wireframe work laid over everything here. But you said something just now. I just want to leave this up here because it looks pretty. You said something that really interested me that I wanted to get into was wherever you go, lines of people to see it. And you guys were at Bit Summit, right? You were at, I think you showed the game off in Sweden as well. You've been all over the world with the game. Have you noticed people culturally responding different to the game and responding differently to the idea of preserving the planet? Like how people are responding to that as you travel around the world, and that means different things to different people.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty universal, to be honest. I mean, and thankfully we've gotten such great feedback, and we've showed it, now a couple times here in New York, especially too, and just every time, we get, people seem to really want to get behind the cause as well. Which there's just unfortunately not enough of this happening in video games, or you don't hear about it enough in video games. So even just the fact that we're here with you today talking about it is really makes us happy that we can spread the word, and hopefully more games like this will kind of come about.
Yeah, for sure. Real quick, talk about the use of color and some of these. They're so vibrant and gorgeous. Talk about working with your artists, the kind of aesthetic you guys had hoped to achieve, if you landed exactly where you wanted to land, and just how we get to images like these.
Well, just to put this out in front, we're never, ever happy with what we've created. We always want to go farther. We want more time, more money to build these things. But where we landed is actually still pretty cool, because I don't think there are many games that look like this. And when I was working in Japan, I was working on some games called Child of Eden and Luminous, and the games that we made at this particular studio were always had that sort of like a little bit of an 80s aesthetic, where with the vector graphics, the lines like asteroids, or old games like Tempest, and that kind of aesthetic really speaks to us because we really like electronic music. So that combined with the fact that it was going to be a dark game because you're underwater a lot of the time, we needed to make sure that things popped. So one of the concepts that we really like to get our heads around is synesthesia, which is like that naturally occurring phenomenon of hearing colors and seeing sound. Now, you can't do that in an actual game, but we can try, right? So we wanted to create things that look basically like a neon underwater wonderland.
Do either of you have synesthesia? I don't. I had a friend who claimed that he did. Yeah, and we would play music together, and he would always be like, "That part sounds blue to me," and I'd be like, "I don't know how to play with blue, bro. It's a guitar." Like I didn't know how to do it, but I was always so jealous.
I don't have it, but I wish.
I can't say I have it either, but but I definitely will say with this game, if you play it in VR, but also just in general. Play it with headphones if you can, or a really good audio system, because audio plays such a big part of it. And it's sort of that combination of the audio and the colors and the visuals. That's really what we hoped for the game to achieve. So
yeah, we really put a lot of effort into the soundtrack. For us, it's not just background music; it's part of the experience. I think if you were to listen to the soundtrack and compare it to things, you'd probably think games like or movies like Blade Runner or Tron, which is not what you might expect from a game that has dolphins in it, right? But we didn't want to take the documentary route.
Yeah, and the other thing too with the audio is that, you know, in the trailers you see kind of the echolocation visual, but there's actually an audio element to the echolocation as well. So if you're swimming around, you might hear, you know, use echolocation, you might hear something over here, you know, behind you. Oh, wow, I actually have to go explore over there and see what's you know, under that rock or something like that too.
It's very apparent the amount of TLC you guys have poured into this and your passion, your love for it. We're gonna go. I have a question in the room to the audience for a second, but I wanted to ask you about, because another really cool thing is the partnership with Sea Legacy and the Ocean Foundation. Did they come on midway? Were they on from the beginning? And just what that partnership looked like and what they brought to the table.
Yes, well, I mean, I think for us, you know, again, it kind of speaks to video games. There are not enough video games like this. It took a little while to kind of educate the various ocean organizations about what we're trying to do, and thankfully, Sea Legacy especially, you know, they do a lot of kind of visual content that really resonates with their social media fans on Instagram especially, and you know, and so they got it. They actually were one of the ones who kind of really immediately got it. Like this can be very powerful. So you know, I think yeah, for us it took a little bit of education just because we're doing something different.
Because it's not like we can point to another game and say we're going to do what these guys are doing, because we're basically the first developer to actually make a point of doing an environmentally themed game. So we had to explain it to them. And video games often have like a negative connotation. You know, people who aren't involved with video games think it's just about shooters and things like that, violent games. So we really had to sort of prepare a lot of material to show them, but once they got it, and they've been very, very supportive.
Yeah,
the Ocean Foundation as well.
Yeah, and even to add to that, Christina, one of the co-founders of Sea Legacy, she was so in love with the story and the game that we're trying to build that she even volunteered to do the voiceover for our story, and it's perfect. It worked out so well for us. We were so happy.
It's pretty awesome. Yeah, I mean, everything about this, and it delivers too. This whole game delivers on the promise of VR. You talk about the perception of, oh, it's all shooters and stuff like that. The whole reason you want to get a VR headset and put it on is to be transported to another world, to experience something unlike anything that you could see without it. And you guys have totally done that above and beyond. You've created a really cool experience. So launching on Earth Day, very, very exciting. It's on PlayStation and PlayStation 4 and PSVR. So you can play without the headset, but if you can, get your hands on a headset.
Exactly.
That's really the way to do it.
Yeah.
Casey, do I have any in the room? I got at least one. I got one question in the room. Let's go ahead and take that real quick before we wrap up here. Microphone all the way in the back.
Gotcha. Hi. So it seems like VR played like a very early on role in development, and I'm just curious, what was the process like developing the game with both VR in mind, but not being crucial to the gameplay?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, what thankfully I think the game developing it in for VR, the game itself lent itself really well to non-VR, I guess I would say, and we're maybe lucky in that respect. But you know, I think one of the I mean, just as a maybe behind the scenes you know, anecdote is just that, you know, the fact that it is in first person from Jupiter's perspective, and you see Mars on screen. That's a very kind of VR first kind of element. Like we had to do it that way to kind of accommodate VR, but it works great as a non-VR game as well.
Yeah, when we were designing it, we designed it for VR first, which was really important because you don't want to design a 2D game and then try and retrofit a virtual world around it, because then that's very hard. But when you're designing everything in VR, to make it playable in non-VR, all you have to pretty much do is turn off VR, and then your world is still there and it's just as playable. So designing things around, you know, being able to let players look around in 360 degrees and see all this cool vegetation and sea life and these amazing structures and architecture, that was the first step.
Yeah. But it was important along the way for us too, in terms of, I mean, it gave us a lot to think about in terms of how do you do cinematics that work in VR, but also non-VR. There's a lot that you can do in a non-VR game that you just can't in VR because you can't be pushing the camera around or doing sweeping motions, things like that. So, you know, it was sort of a learning experience for us as well along the way. We had to figure out what might cause people to get motion sickness and all of that. But you know, it was a cool adventure kind of putting it together, that's for sure.
Awesome. Hey, thanks so much for your question. Before we wrap things up, I know like the significance and what E3 means in the gaming world has changed over the years. It's certainly not the same thing it was when I was a kid and I watched it, but it's still an important moment. Are you guys going to be at E3? What are you looking forward to in the future? I know you're taking this game on the road. Are you already working on the next game? Give us a window ahead. What's coming up for Tigertron?
Well, we're probably not going to be at this year's E3, just because, you know, Jupiter and Mars will be out. But we are working on our next game. Wouldn't be ready for this year, not for this year's E3, but we're actively working on it, and yeah.
Yeah, the cool thing about what we're trying to do with this future Earth of ours is that like our next game and hopefully our next 10 games will all take place in the same Earth. So for our next game, it's going to take place on land, and there are going to be kind of touchstones where the world above ground takes sort of links up with Jupiter and Mars, and if you're looking in the right place at the right time over a cliff, you might see Jupiter and Mars, you know, skimming over the water. So we want to tie it together like that.
People love a freaking shared universe these days, man. Fantastic. All right, well, I'll say one last time. It's releasing Earth Day on PlayStation 4 and PSVR. Earth Day is the 22nd. Let me confirm. Yes, it is the 22nd of April. So get your hands on a copy. Definitely try the game out. It is awesome, and it's a really great experience. Guys, make some noise and join me in thanking James Mielke and Sam Kennedy from Tigertron. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.